How good of a PC can you guys get for under 500 bucks? Well, today I have 8 options for you. Alright, welcome to today's video, guys. Obviously, just as the title says, we're going to look at 8 different builds that I put together for under 500 bucks. Now, this video is going to be a little off the cuff. I didn't really script it a whole lot, but I'm going to try to do my best to go through my rationale in some of these builds and how you can kind of take the general framework of what I put together here and you can kind of mix and match parts for whatever you need. So, taking a look at our first build here, I'm using PC Part Picker for all this stuff, and all the links to these PC Part Picker lists I'm going to put down in the description below. But I decided to start with the i3-12100F. This is kind of the most powerful lower end CPU that I could find that I think is actually like really an awesome gaming processor. There are some cheaper options and I'm going to go over those a little bit later, but I kind of just wanted to show the 12100F first and then I'll show the cheaper CPUs as we go along. So the caveat really with going with the cheaper ones, which I'll go over more once I get to them, is you can kind of get a higher end graphics card because you're saving a little bit more money on your processor. But one thing I will say is if you do go with the 12100F and maybe you're just on a tight budget now, but you might, get some money in the future, or you're waiting for like a tax return or something and you just kind of want something that'll work today, the 12100F is going to be really good for you if you plan on doing like an upgrade in the future and you just need something to get you by. So yeah, I'm sure you guys have seen some of my videos I've done on the 12100F. It's one of my favorite budget processors out. We decided to go with this Gigabyte B660M DSH3 DDR4 board. 100 bucks. I think I've used this board before. I think it's a fantastic motherboard for, the cost that it's at right now. Basically, we're looking for any B660 board within the $100 range. Some of them aren't going to have the best like VRMs and stuff like that, but if you're never planning on upgrading your CPU, I wouldn't worry too much about it. I just wouldn't go with an H610 class of board. A lot of them have super stripped down features that you really got to watch out for. So yeah, anyways, this Gigabyte B661 is fantastic. Really basic kit of DDR4 3200 MHz CL16. There is a pretty good kit by G-Skill out if you want to spend a little extra money. That's a 3600 MHz CL16 kit, so it's a little bit quicker. I was using that kit for a little while in my personal rig, and I didn't notice a big difference between like a normal 3200 MHz kit personally. I'm going to be honest. So basically, yeah, 3200 CL16 is pretty tried and true, and this is an extremely cheap kit. DDR4 RAM is dirt cheap right now. I went with a 512 gigabyte stick from Silicon Power for our storage. You could jump up to a terabyte using the same brand. 512 gigs is kind of as cheap as you can get. That will get you by and get you downloading at least a couple games. Games are taking up more and more space nowadays, but if you're only playing a handful, that's probably fine. And 512 gigs, if you're only playing a couple games, at any given time, you can probably uninstall whatever games that you're not playing and install some new ones. It's kind of a pain, but there's always room to upgrade on this motherboard in the future too. There is another M.2 slot, so I'll skip over the video card for now because I'll talk about that more when we get to it. But this Fantex Eclipse case was kind of the cheapest case I could find at the moment that comes with a free fan and has decent airflow. You could go hunting probably a little harder than I did here and save a little extra money on the case, but some of the other cheaper cases that I was managing to find, I just really didn't like the feature set and stuff, but you could arguably save a couple bucks here too. And then I went with this Thermaltake 550 watt bronze certified power supply. We don't need a whole lot of wattage from our power supply, and like I said, when you're getting super budget like this build, you're not looking for much of an upgrade path except for maybe the graphics card, and anything I would upgrade this build with wouldn't go past the 550 watt power supply anyways. So this one's good. It's bronze certified. I think it's C tier rated on the Cultist tier list, so it gets us by, and it's really cheap right now. So power supplies are generally, right at this moment of recording, a little expensive. yeah, then we have our RX 580 8GB. Now, this is probably the cheapest card I would pick up for its performance. This is like literally baseline. Is going with the 588 gigabyte. It's actually a really fantastic card, and I saw listings for 90 bucks. You can find some benchmarks out there, but at 1080p, this card will get you like medium settings to low on newer titles, and on older ones you can play probably on ultra, even max out settings. The biggest thing is the 8 gigabytes of VRAM. With the way games are trending, the 8 gigabytes of VRAM actually gets you really far nowadays. It's super shocking how well this card does in the modern age. But yeah, so that's our first build. 477 bucks. You're gonna see a lot of the same parts reused. I'll be honest, I basically picked the silicon power kit, the silicon power solid state drive, the same case and the same power supply for every build. The only thing changing is the CPU and the graphics card. So main reason being is this is kind of just like the cheapest in class stuff you can find for any of these builds. It's just going to use the same stuff, you know what I mean? So the only thing that you can really do to shave either even more money or switch around your budget a little bit depending on what you can buy is, you know, changing the CPU or the graphics card. So for the next build, it's another 12100 F1. This one I'm going to go through a little bit more quickly because honestly it's not much different from the last one we did. It's exactly the same parts except for a 1066 gigabyte. Now this is really just if you feel like you have to have NVIDIA, because the RX 580 performs really similarly to this card and it has 2 extra gigabytes of VRAM. But if you're like really diehard on NVIDIA, you can spend an extra 20 bucks. It still is under 500, very slimly, but it is under 500. And then you can get yourself a 1060 NVIDIA card. Like I said, I wouldn't really recommend it. You can save 20 bucks and get the 580 and it's almost the same performance. And it's got the extra 2 gigs of VRAM, which is relevant nowadays. One thing to look out for when getting a 1060 is make sure that it's a 6 gigabyte version. The 3 gigabyte version is extremely trimmed down and does not perform the same as this. It is a much worse card, so just watch out for that when you're looking at eBay listings. But yeah, that's really it for the second build. Just swapping in a 1060. That's about as high as you can get while staying under 500 bucks. You can't really go much more expensive without cresting over the $500 mark. Alright, the next build, I'm changing up the processor. We are still using the RX 580 8GB, but we're going with a slightly cheaper setup with the 5500. Now the CPU only costs a couple bucks less, so you're like, where are we saving the money? And it's in the motherboard. The AMD motherboards, because all of them are kind of backwards compatible, can use older motherboards that are selling for really cheap right now. So this one's only $80, and it's actually a really nice board. It is a B450, so it's kind of old. You're gonna have to use BIOS flashback for this board, but it does have a BIOS flashback feature in it, which is really nice, and it's super easy to do. So basically you save an extra 20 bucks over going with the i3 build, and the 5500 performs roughly the same as a 12100F. It's just a slight bit weaker, but you probably would never notice it in game. But if you look up some benchmarks, 12100F is a tad bit faster. But if you're looking to save like 20 bucks on your build, this is where I would go. As you can see, we're, like I said, 20 bucks cheaper on the overall cost compared to the 12100F version of this build. Everything else is exactly the same with the RAM and the 512 gigabyte storage card. Nice thing about, you know, saving a couple bucks, if you have 500 bucks and now you're looking and you're like, oh, I got $40 room, you can make a couple small upgrades. You know, you can go up to a terabyte here, you can get maybe a better case, stuff like that. I didn't go through the effort of doing all that work, but it's just another look, right? Saving a little bit more money by going with this setup. You got a little extra if you're trying to just hit 500 bucks on the dot. You can make some small upgrades to a couple other components. Moving on to our next build here. With the money I saved, if you want to go with the same exact components with the 500 gigs of storage and all that, like I was mentioning, because we are saving an extra 20 bucks, I could put $20 towards the GPU on this one, and I decided to grab a 1650 Super. Now, it isn't substantially more powerful than the 1060 or 580, but it is a more powerful card. It does have less VRAM, so keep that in mind depending on the games that you're playing. But we barely stick under the $500 mark from what I could find on eBay. And, you know, there is a caveat with some of this, guys, especially with like these eBay cards I'm pulling up. Prices fluctuate a little bit, and you can definitely shop around more than I did. I was just kind of looking at the most trusted listings I could find. Some of you might be able to take a small gamble and save a little more than I was able to, but I was able to find a 1650 Super for 130 bucks. Pretty powerful card. There is a reason why it's the most popular graphics card right now on the Steam hardware survey. It's a cheap card that definitely gets the job done in most every case. Like I said, the 4 gigs of VRAM can be a problem depending on the game, but a lot of those titles that require all that VRAM use, you know, ray tracing and stuff, and none of the cards I've shown you today are going to be using ray tracing, or even can utilize ray tracing for that matter. Yeah, so most games should be just fine on 4 gigabytes for these kinds of cards, because you're gonna have to load the graphic settings anyways. So yeah, powerful card, slightly more powerful than the ones I was showing you before. And just to kind of show you guys like the power levels I'm talking about here, so you can get a better idea, I pulled up Tech Power up here with the relative performance chart. It's honestly quite accurate. You're gonna have some nuance depending on the game and stuff, obviously, but as you can see, here's the 1650 Super. That's the 100%. And then if we scroll up, there we go. So yeah, it's only 5% better than the 1066 gigabyte. So you're kind of spending, you know, we're kind of going up like 20 bucks at a time in our tiers here. It's like you're gonna see something similar with like the you're gonna see something similar with the RX 580 as well. It's not like the biggest jump in the world. Oh, actually, the RX 580 is actually a little more powerful than the 1060. So I was even wrong in that aspect. It really, if you are gonna grab a 1060 over the 580, it really is just because you are dead set on getting an NVIDIA card. But yeah, so as you can see, it's only a slight jump in performance from the 580 or the 1060. But it's one of those things where it's like, if you're looking for a little more performance and you want to spend a little extra, and you got the room, you get a 1650 Super. It is slightly more powerful, but not substantially so. So, kind of up to you guys. All right, now we have our last CPU option here, and this one is kind of scary to get into. You basically have no great upgrade path, but if you're really on a tight budget, the 10100F is still a pretty good processor, honestly. It'll get the job done. It'll let you play most games that you want to play. It's just unfortunate that it's getting pretty old now, but for 75 bucks, you really cannot get anything better for cheaper than this processor, in my opinion. And the motherboard prices are actually extremely cheap too. This is a Z590 board for 90 bucks. And I'm gonna be honest, you could upgrade to like a 10600K or something down the line, or an 11700K or whatever, and use this board. If you find those processors at a good price and you have money, you know, down the road and you want to make a small upgrade. So I kind of think that this setup is really nice for what you're spending. It just is very old at this point. It's really getting phased out, but that's why it's so cheap. Same RAM, same storage, same song and dance, but the graphics card is actually really nice on this build. And and we are still under 500 bucks. I decided to get the 1070 Ti for this one. So that is the big benefit, in my opinion, on going with this build in particular, is the parts are very old, but going with this build and not thinking about any upgradability, this is going to get you the furthest, in my opinion, for the longest amount of time compared to the other builds today. And it's because of this 1070 Ti. Now, if you need like really high FPS in games like Counter-Strike or League of Legends or something, the 10100F isn't going to be great at that. But if you're playing mostly single player titles, Spider-Man's, Horizon Zero Dawn, Red Dead Redemption, the 1070 Ti is super capable at doing that kind of stuff, and you aren't utilizing your CPU power as much as you would be in a competitive game where you're trying to get really high frame rates. So you do have to keep that kind of stuff in mind with these builds as well, is the kind of games that you are playing. So this is kind of like the single player dream build where you want to get into PC gaming and you're mainly looking at single player, or I mean there are some multiplayer titles that don't require high FPS that you can play with your friends too, like The Forest or Sons of the Forest. That the 1070 Ti does just fine playing, that you'll have a lot of fun with, and it's an extremely cheap build. Managed to get under 500 bucks. So comparatively to like the 1650 Super we were just looking at, 1070 Ti is 44% better, guys. 44%. It is by far the best graphics card that we could put in this build. It's better than a 3050, and they're really cheap right now. $140. I can't stress it enough. I think the 1070 Ti is one of the best used cards that you can pick up right now. The 588 gigabyte is also a fantastic card for what it's selling for. So if you got an extra 50 bucks that you can scrounge, I'd get the 1070 Ti. Yeah, like I said, it's a fantastic card. I had one in my older build from a year or two ago when the pandemic was going on and it was impossible to get graphics cards, and I felt extremely fortunate to have had a 1070 Ti of all things in my build because it still could play everything I wanted to play. And it has been another 2 years in the future, but people frequently use the 1060 still in games, or the 1650 Super. Just because they're the most popular Steam cards, and you can see that those games still on lower settings can manage at 60 FPS or get close to, and if the 1060 can manage 60 FPS in those titles, the 1070 Ti does even better, and you can probably raise your settings as well. I really can't say much more good things about the card. I think it's a bit underrated. A lot of people look at the 1060 or 1080 when they're looking at older cards from the Pascal generation, but I think the 1070 Ti is the biggest steal right now. So anyways, yeah, that's this build. 10100F. All that money that we're saving by going with this really old platform on super cheap pricing lets us get an extremely nice graphics card compared to the other builds. And now we have another potential card that you could go with here, and it's the 5600 XT. We're still barely under 500 bucks, but this is also with the 10100F. You can see how much room saving this money on the CPU and motherboard has given us with getting a better graphics card. Like I said, the caveat still being that the 10100F is on a dead-end platform and it's a really old part at this point. But like I said, you just see all the room that we get with getting these higher-end graphics cards. 5600 XT, really nice card. It's only slightly better than the 1070 Ti, but it is a newer card. I'm not sure if they're still supporting the drivers. I think they are, but Pascal is kind of starting to phase out. The 5600 XT might have a little more longevity for you in the years to come, because it really was just 2 generations ago. I mean, we just got to the 7000 series generation from AMD. So this card, in terms of release date, is much newer. Like, let's just look. 1070 Ti. So this came out in 2017. Let's check out the 5600 XT. 2020. So you have a card that's only 3 years old. And that's the launch date. So, you know, they were still probably making this card up until 2021 actively. So you just have a much newer card. And like I said, you are spending a little more for it. And it is AMD and not Intel, or not Nvidia. But, you know, being on, you know, this card I think is just going to last you a little bit longer, basically. It does have less VRAM. But yeah, I mean, that's really all I got to say about it. Is it performs almost exactly like a 1070 Ti when you're looking at the chart. I do feel probably in some newer games, the drivers and stuff might favor this card a little bit more. I think it really does depend on the games you're playing, so you can do a little research and look at some benchmarks between the two cards and just see what's going on with them in today's day and age. But I think the 5600 XT is still an okay option if you're looking for something that isn't so old and might last you a little bit longer. All right, and I have 2 builds left for you guys. I kind of cheated on these ones a little bit, but it's because I kind of wanted to show you how even spending an extra like $10 or $12 over 500 bucks can get you a pretty nice setup. So this is a 5500 XT, and this card's okay. It's pretty good. If you look at the chart here, it operates better than the 580, not by a whole lot, but it does operate a little bit better, and it's a newer card. So this is kind of like the newer card option once again, and we're just like $3 over our budget. So this is the 12100F again with the B660 board from Gigabyte. Yeah, the 5500 XT, it's a good card. It's not a fantastic card, but for $115 I was able to find it for really not too bad, and it just barely crests you over the $500 mark. So like I said, it's kind of cheating, but it's just like, I do wonder if I tried looking for a deal, I could have technically gotten under the $500 mark. So keep the 5500 XT in your radar. I think the 580 is probably the better option, but it's just kind of another one of those things where, like I said, if you're looking for a little more longevity, the 5500 XT is newer, so it's going to be around longer and getting driver support longer than the 580 will. So just keep that in mind, and this is another option for you guys. And this is the very last option I'm going to show you guys, and this is probably my favorite build, and once again kind of goes over 500 bucks, but it's the 5500 with a B450 and a 1070 Ti. I just really like the AMD platform. I like how much money you're saving on this motherboard with a good motherboard too. The 1070 Ti, as I was saying before, it's just such a fantastic card for what it's selling for right now. And I think overall, even though you're spending, you know, $10 over the $500 budget, I think this is overall the most powerful system you can kind of put together out of the whole list. It gets you on like a new platform. It's not going to be outdated. You do have, I mean, it's getting phased out now, but you have some good upgrade options out there still with the 5800X 3D. 1070 Ti is just a fantastic card, and it's going to last you still probably quite a while. And it's just 10 bucks over budget. I think overall this is the best option within that $500 range. And once again, go deal shopping a little bit. Sometimes I've seen the 5500 go under $100, so you can look around for that and you save the, you know, 10 bucks over here. Look for a 1070 Ti that maybe is 130 rather than 140, and you can get in that $500 mark. So that is kind of really all I have for you guys today. Video's a bit long-winded because I rambled about these builds a bit, but that's been 8 builds for 500 bucks. I do hope that this helped you guys out with some of your choices. It's a pretty awesome time to be building computers at the moment, outside of like the really high-end stuff, because all that is extremely expensive. But when it comes to cheap builds, man, I have not been able to put a computer together for under $500 in years. So the used market right now, with a lot of these older cards still being fantastic for most of today's games, and a lot of the budget CPUs having as much horsepower as they do for the cost that they're selling for, it's just really awesome to see. And it's super fun to put these builds together and just see how cheap we can get this stuff while still having a lot of performance. I'd just like to thank you all for watching today. Leave a comment if you have any extra, you know, graphics cards that you think I could have tossed into the mix, or, you know, CPUs I might have missed. I think all the other parts are not necessarily non-negotiable, but you could search around for some deals maybe on a couple other components and save a couple bucks here or there. Some of that might be a little arguable. Yeah, leave a comment down below if you have any other ideas for like CPUs or GPUs I could have tossed into the mix here that, you know, you've seen good deals on. And if you've been enjoying my content, please subscribe. It helps out the channel a lot. Once again, thank you for watching. and I hope y'all have a fantastic day.